In the complex puzzle surrounding JonBenet Ramsey's death, one thread of inquiry I think is often overlooked is the subtle way John Ramsey introduces his cigar habits during interviews. In 1998, John Ramsey voluntarily mentioned, I think, storing his cigars in the basement, even calling it a humid environment suitable for storage. A detail that seems to me like these little things that disproportionately it's disproportionately specific in the absence of a direct question. And what emerges from this casual disclosure is not merely a man discussing his smoking routine, I think, but someone laying groundwork to justify sort of like this frequent presence in the very space where his daughter's body was found. And when taken at face value, the explanation seems benign. But in the context of a homicide investigation, voluntary and unnecessary details, especially about a crime scene, for me warrant closer scrutiny. John Ramsey's narrative around his cigar usage becomes increasingly layered as the interview progresses, or as the interviews progress. He identifies the brand of cigars as Monte Cristos, admits to smuggling them from Europe, and he states that he smoked once or twice a week, usually en route to the airport. Yet, despite his vivid recall of international cigar purchases and brand names, he remains vague on other critical elements, such as which shirt he wore on Christmas night. This discrepancy between his photographic memory for luxury habits and his foggy recall of evidence critical details is, I don't think, accidental. It is, I think, some sort of behavioral signaling, just in my opinion. It's not an admission of guilt. But the specificity surrounding the cigars creates sort of a convenient, preemptive justification for why his personal belongings and perhaps his maybe DNA might appear in proximity to the crime scene. And these disclosures also shape our understanding of the basement's function in the Ramsey household. While John attempts to frame the wine cellar as this dead end room used only for storing decorations or wine once a year, his own words seem to contradict that claim. He tells investigators he kept his cigars there and accessed them regularly. Um, this admission, I think, positions him as someone familiar with the layout, conditions, and the inventory of a room he otherwise claims was rarely used. When paired with photographic evidence and his reactions to items he supposedly didn't recognize, such as a cigar box labeled Romeo and Juliet's, John's commentary starts to resemble a carefully crafted alibi of what it might seem, more than an offhand recollection. And I think the more he tries to distance himself from the basement, I think the clearer it becomes that it was a space he knew quite well. We talked a little bit in the previous episodes or other episodes. I think it was particularly the one about Patsy Ramsey's fibers being found in the basement. And I noted here that John said, "Hey, I would go take, JonBenet got on to me, and we'll talk a little bit about that." But I said that John probably it was likely that he went down to the basement at least during the daytime on Christmas Day, because JonBenet would get on to him for smoking and drinking. And so he mentions, as we'll see later on, that he could only really do those things, or he could only really smoke on the way to the airport. In which, he probably in that case took a cigar with him on the way to the airport, and he was out there for 3 hours, probably with a cigar in hand and working on the airplane. So let's jump into it. Now, specifically looking at John Ramsey's cigar habits and storage. In a 1998 interview, John Ramsey explained that he kept his cigars in the basement, specifically mentioning that it was a humid environment suitable for storage. He recalled placing a cigar box on a paint can in that area. And one thing that really stood out to me in John Ramsey's 1998 interview was when he voluntarily, I think, brought up keeping his cigars in the basement, and even went so far as to explain that it was a humid environment suitable for storage. Now, unless someone asked him specifically about cigars or humidity, which I don't think they did, that detail feels oddly inserted. I know a little bit about cigars, and I think I understand that they need to be stored in a controlled humidity. I understand that. I get that. And I was doing some research because I'm not that big of a cigar person, but I've just kind of seen them around, friends and family and stuff like that. And from some of the research that I was doing, and not all of my family stores cigars in humid areas, just to be clear. Uh, but I think usually around maybe 65% to 72% to maintain their integrity and their flavor. But, I'm not sure. And maybe if you're a cigar person, maybe you know this and maybe you practice this. But also, again, maybe you don't. Maybe you just whatever fashion in which you get the cigar, that's where you smoke it and you feel like, hey, nothing's going to change. So unless you're sort of an avid cigar person, you probably wouldn't mention those details. But even still, why would John feel the need to mention that? It's almost like he's over explaining, trying to justify why he would be down in the basement at all, as if preemptively excusing his presence in that space without being directly asked. Most people, I don't think, offer cigar storage conditions as casual interview material unless it serves a purpose, which makes me wonder. Was he setting up a reason for why his DNA or items tied to him might be found near the wine cellar? And here's the thing, I don't think I'm buying that this is just about cigars. Okay? There are other places cigars could be stored. He had an office, right, at on Pearl Street, at Access Graphics, right. He had an office upstairs in his bedroom. He had a bedroom, right. He could have stored those cigars upstairs and stepped out on the balcony or opened a window to smoke, right? Especially if the kids weren't around, the kids were sleeping or what have you, especially that time in which he broke the window to get in and the kids apparently or supposedly weren't there. We found that I think Burke seems to have contradicted that story. But especially if those kids weren't around, John would have plenty of time to just focus on himself. Or if he goes out of town, you take those with you, you can go wild. So what makes but my point is you have other outlets. You don't have to wait till you go to the airport to do that. You have other outlets, especially if JonBenet is asleep. So what makes the basement, specifically the area near the wine cellar, because there's a triangulation right here, right, near the wine cellar, we're not just talking about anywhere in the basement, we're talking about moving toward the wine cellar in which JonBenet was found, because we're tracking a pattern of movements. Why over here in the wine cellar, where things that you're familiar with? Why was the wine cellar, though, so special that he'd go out of his way to store the cigars there? Was he going down there at times? I know he said, "Oh, I'm doing it over here," or whatever. But was he? Is it possible that John was going down there at times to try to smoke in private? Was he spending time in that space for other reasons? To me, that's not just an offhand comment about cigar habits. I think it's a planted detail meant to subtly normalize his access and his presence in the basement. But all it really does to me is raise more questions. Because now I'm wondering, were the cigars a real habit or just a narrative placeholder to explain away activity in a room where his daughter's body was later found? Because I feel like, and I'm not going to quote it right offhand, but I feel like there were times in which John was like, "Oh, giving up information ahead of time to say that." I mean, and I would be looking like, "Well, I didn't ask you that. Why would you tell me that?" Just volunteering that information. Oh, and I went in there and I tried to untie the knot because it was too tight, and I didn't because it was too tight. It was taut, and I couldn't. But I was able to get this one off of it, and I looked and I jumped up and I knocked the nail loose from over the wine cellar, and then I got down, and then immediately, whoa, there she is, and I got down and I whispered in her ear, and it's like, okay, I can get behind that. I can get behind that level of detail. But stuff like this that we're not even asking, because John does this typically, and it comes out, if you'll notice, it comes out as a way of saying, well, I drove my car down to, I might ask, so you said you went down to the airport that day. Is that correct? Um, yes, sir. And instead of just leaving it at that, yep, I drove down to the airport today to clean the plane. Yep, that's what I was doing there. John will say, well, or something to the effect. He'll say something to the effect of, "Well, yeah, I did drive my car down to the airport that day because everybody was coming in town, and I wanted it to be, and which he actually did say this, and I wanted it to be nice. Melinda was bringing her fiance, and what's his name, Stuart Long, uh, bringing her fiance, and I wanted it nice and clean for him, and so I spent about 3 hours out there checking the oil and everything, and so on and so forth." Uh, okay. Didn't specifically ask you that, but thanks for the information. The volunteering of information is what's getting me in a direction that I don't really care about. If I'm an investigator, I don't really care about that at this point. So, in a 1998 interview, still, when shown crime scene photos, John identified Monte Cristo cigars, which he described as Cubans. In one of the images, I think photograph 263, 264, 265, I think. He further clarified that he obtained these Cuban cigars during his trips to Europe, in which he said that he took 2 or 3 times a year. When asked by Mike Cain if he had sneaked them back through customs, I think was his direct phrasing. I had sneaked them back through customs, and John Ramsey confirmed that he did. So Mike Cain said, "How'd you get them in here? Would you sneak them back through?" And John said, "Yeah, I did." So when John Ramsey identified the cigars in the crime scene photos as Cristos, and then casually admitted to sneaking them back into the U.S. from Europe, that kind of stuck out to me. First off, Monte Cristos, I think, from what I was looking at, they seem to be a well-known brand, especially among those who are into premium cigars. And they originated, I think, in Cuba and became famous for their rich flavor and craftsmanship. I could be wrong, but this is all the stuff that I'm trying to research. And since the U.S. embargo made Cuban cigars illegal for import, getting authentic Monte Cristos, especially Cuban ones, I think became a kind of status flex, right? And that would make sense. Um, a connoisseur or frequent traveler might get them in Europe, particularly I think in places like Switzerland, France, or maybe even the UK, maybe, where Cuban cigars, because John didn't say, he just said I got them from Europe, where Cuban cigars are maybe legally sold at these places. Um, so John saying that he picked them up during these business trips, maybe 2 or 3 times a year, sort of tells me that this wasn't a casual habit. I think it was intentional, something he prioritized, something he planned for. This was a man who appreciated the exclusivity and the prestige of what he was smoking. Um, this has got to be John, similar to the black fibers or the black sweater from Israel. This has got to be John. John is, I did the Porsche, you know what I mean? The boat, the Jeep. This has got to be, this is John. I'm silently flexing. And if you know anything about cigars, if you're a connoisseur, like myself. This is what I imagine John saying. If you're a connoisseur of cigars like myself, right, then you know what this is. I don't have to tell you. Okay. Okay. I get it. Hey, there's nothing wrong with being rich at all. Trust me when I say there's nothing wrong with being rich. If it's a flex, it's a flex. It's a status flex. No problem with that. If you got the money, then do it. I'm not mad at you for that. But this is who you are. And sometimes there is a way in which wealthy people speak about their wealth. And I'm not hating on wealthy people. I'm not disparaging them. I'm not saying it's bad. What I'm saying is when I used to work for a young lady. I call her a young lady. She was, quite a bit older. Um, she was a millionaire, quite well to do. And sometimes we'd go to this very fancy restaurant and she'd take all us employees out and she'd pay for us. And I mean, and I'm not talking about no cheap stuff, man. I'm talking about $100 a steak, type of stuff, pay for all of us. I think it was about, man, sometimes it'd be a smaller group, maybe five of us, just our immediate group, and sometimes it'd be the bigger group. Man, I remember one time at the Christmas, I think it was, I don't know if it was Christmas, but it was an event that we were putting on at the time, and they rented out the entire spot, that entire spot, and sort of paid for everybody's dinner. Quite a flex, and we paid for it out of pocket. Just the company did, and she was the owner of the company, and so quite well to do. But anyways, uh, there's a certain way. Not only was it a flex to pay for the whole table, and she was eating something, and I think she asked. I think a coworker of mine, he had a steak, and she said, "Oh, cut me a piece." And so he cut her a piece and kind of gave it to her. And she said, "Oh, that's good." And she ordered a steak to go just like that. And in other cases, she'd come in and say, "Oh, we're going, to this retreat with all these NFL executives this weekend, NFL executives that we've met." So there's a kind of status flex. You know what I mean? Like, I don't tell me. It's like tell me you're rich without telling me you're rich kind of deal. No problem with that. I don't mind that. And so we see John kind of doing the same kind of thing. But what John gives us is he gives us a little bit of bait. He lets us have the fact that maybe he illegally snuck in some Monte Cristos, right? And that's the part that makes me pause. It's how freely he offers up the detail that he knowingly broke federal law by sneaking them through customs. That's not something that he had to say, right? If your attorney is in the room with you, right? I don't want to admit to breaking any law that's going to get you on my back. He could have just said, "I got him in Europe." But no, he goes on and goes out of his way to admit that he bought them back illegally. Why? To me, that reads like someone trying to appear relatable, imperfect, maybe even charming in a rule breaking way. It's a psychological move, almost like saying, "See, I'm not the killer. I'm just the guy who likes good cigars and, bends the rules every now and again. But me do this? Nah, that's not me." And it kind of feels like an attempt to disarm the investigator in a way, right? By being a little vulnerable, like he's trying to sort of manufacture rapport, right? And while it seems as if he's confident, remembering the exact brand and the international details of his cigars, he somehow can't recall, but specifically, which black shirt he wore the night his daughter was murdered. That inconsistency seems a little bit glaring. There's also something suspicious about the specificity with which he names these cigars versus the vagueness about other key evidence. He couldn't remember the shirt he wore on Christmas night, which is a major piece of potential evidence tied to forensic fiber transfer. Has no trouble identifying the Monte Cristos, though, from a photo, linking them to his trips abroad. Knows exactly where he got them. And I go 2 or 3 times a year, he said. That level of clarity, I think, could be curated. And it makes me wonder if this entire story about the cigar is meant to provide a socially acceptable reason for why his belongings, specifically the cigar box, like on the paint can that he said, might be found in the basement. He almost seems, it seems to be the case that he's inserting a narrative here. He's trying to get a narrative started here. And it sounds worldly, it sounds normal. Okay, yeah, you got cigars on a box downstairs, no problem, you go down there, whatever. But it does double to me as a preemptive justification for why his personal effects were near the crime scene. Subtle but calculated overshare here, and I can't help but think that there's a motive behind that precision, which we'll go on to talk about. Further, in 1998, John Ramsey stated that he would smoke a cigar once or twice a week, typically reserving this activity for when he drove to the airport. He explained that he did not smoke inside the house because JonBenet would, quote, would actually get after me if I smoked or drank a beer, end quote, indicating a household environment where smoking was discouraged, especially around the children. Now, this is the part where I start getting a little bit more concerned. John casually tells us he smokes cigars once or twice a week, and it's usually when he drives to the airport. So on the surface, that might not raise alarm bells. But when I put that together with what else we know, I think the picture starts to shift a little bit, right? Because first of all, why is he going to the airport so frequently? That frequently, like once or twice a week. I didn't know he was going to the airport once or twice a week. I thought he was traveling like maybe once a month or something like that, maybe once or twice a month. And I thought there were times in which he was traveling and he was flying on the company plane, or he was being flown out by the company. But in this case, it appears he had access to, his private plane. And so maybe he was checking on it, cleaning it, prepping it for family trips like the one they had to, play into Charlevoix after Christmas. But it seems like he's there quite frequently. So still, let's not miss what he's saying here. I think he's engaging in a weekly routine that allows him to access the basement regularly or I think Jeffco is 19 minutes down the road. Like 17 minutes down the road. And so it's a habit that allows him to go down into the basement twice a week, but also be out of the house twice a week for hours at a time. Unless you are flying that plane twice a week, I'm not sure why you're down there twice a week. Now, there is a plane that he had. I think he had 2 planes. One he was renting out, and maybe he was renting them both out to make them pay for themselves. Maybe that's the case. And under those auspices, it makes sense. But what you're telling me is that you have a weekly routine, not a monthly, not a biannual, not a every couple of months kind of deal. You have a weekly routine of going down to this basement. You access this basement regularly. So, because, of course, that's where the cigars are. I got that. But if you're telling me you smoke cigars once or twice a week and you store them in the basement, then to me it logically follows that you're in the basement at least that often. which contradicts the idea that the basement was some rarely used part of the house, right? And what's strange is that he doesn't present this like it's a big deal, but it is. If you're going down there weekly, opening the box, grabbing a cigar, putting the lid back on, and walking back upstairs, then you're in that space enough to notice things. You'd notice if something were out of place, I would think. If a window was cracked, if a suitcase had moved, or if something had been tampered with. And I think that kind of regular exposure makes you hyper familiar with your surroundings. It's similar like if you drive your car every day, you're going to notice stuff about your car. Eventually you're going to notice sounds, you're going to notice scrapes and all such as that about your car because I drive my car every day. And it's not that I'm looking for scrapes and things of like that nature, but I will notice just out of the corner of my eye, wait a minute, what's wrong with my tire? What's wrong with my license plate? Right? So when he downplays his presence in the basement or acts like it's not a space that he really used, I'm starting to find that hard to believe. He hasn't said anything about grabbing multiple cigars at once to avoid frequent trips. Like, oh, when I go down there, I just grab like 5 and keep them in the car, maybe in the glove compartment, so I don't have to keep going down there all the time. He hasn't said he bought the box upstairs. I brought it upstairs so that I don't have to deal with that. And then goes back down there and leaves it down there when it's empty. No. From what we're told, this was a routine. He went down, got one, came back up. That makes the basement sort of a consistent part of a weekly pattern. Oh, you're down there all the time, buddy. And when you look at it that way, that cigar habit takes on a whole new meaning. It's not just about a casual indulgence. It becomes part of sort of this quiet reason for John to be in the very space where we know that JonBenet was later found. Frequency matters. If you're down there weekly, then you can't act shocked about the layout, or unfamiliar with what's stored down there and where, or confused about whether things were normal down there on the 26th. You had a reason to be in that space on a regular basis, and the fact that you remembered to tell us about the cigars, how often you smoke them, when you do it, how JonBenet didn't like it, all feels like a little bit of a setup, because it's like he's giving us the explanation before we even ask the question. And yet, despite being so detailed about that routine, he wants us to believe that he barely used the basement. I'm not buying that. You saw that basement once a week. And when something big would have happened down there, you want us to think that you're completely disconnected from it. Further, in 1998, John Ramsey noted that he had removed 2 cigars from the box, suggesting it should have been reasonably full at the time of the incident when this whole thing happened to JonBenet. Okay, so now we're being specific. Okay, I removed 2 cigars from that box. Okay, and here we go again. We see this familiar pattern that both John and Patsy keep falling into. They point out things that are off or not normal, right? But never in a way that actually deepens our understanding or holds up under scrutiny, right? Oh, that doesn't seem right. That seems off. That's not normal to me. Patsy and John keep doing that. If we take John's comments about the cigar box in 1998, he says he had only taken out 2, so the box should have been reasonably full, and at the time of the incident. But what's the point of telling us that? Are you trying to suggest that someone, maybe the intruder, maybe took some cigars, right? Smoked one in the basement? Because if that's where this is going, I have questions. First, nobody reported the smell of a cigar in the house that night. And JonBenet herself, according to John, didn't even like when he smoked. So you're telling me this alleged intruder came in, took your child, wrote a ransom note, staged the crime scene, and then what? Had a glass of tea, made himself a glass of tea, helped himself to one of your Monte Cristo cigars, kicked back for a puff, and then in the wine cellar, and then before he left, left in a panic actually because he knocked stuff over. It's just more of the same. They keep throwing out these little tidbits. Something was out of place. Something didn't look right. But there's never any follow through. There's no logic to it. And more importantly, there's no consistent narrative. Because if something was genuinely off, then we need to know why it was off. What's the implications, right? And whether if something is off, does it support or contradict the timeline of what we're talking about? Instead, we get these throwaway details that are either vague, they're so vague they're meaningless, or they're oddly specific, like the state of a cigar box. They feel performative. And so it's kind of like the worst, it's like the worst kind of storytelling, over explaining in areas that don't matter and under explaining in stuff that we really want to know. I need to know that, John. Oh, I don't know. Like he did with Lou Smith and the pineapple. And Lou was, well, John, we need to know that. John was, I don't know. I can't tell you. Do you know anybody who may have done this to your daughter, who may have been involved with your daughter in an inappropriate way? Well, I don't know. I can't begin to tell you. I have no recollection. You have none, no recollection of who was around your daughter. My God. Maybe John just smoked more cigars than he remembered in this case. I think to me that's a more reasonable explanation than trying to tie the fullness of a cigar box to some imagined burglar who, who happened to have a taste for Cuban tobacco. But they didn't say that because there needs to be this illusion of mystery and disruption without the burden of proof. And that's what makes it all feel like a carefully crafted narrative. It's like they're trying to appear observant without ever being accountable for what those observations actually mean. You can't just start throwing me bull crap and being like, oh, I did notice that the paint on this wall is pink instead of white. Yeah, and? Well, when I went to bed that night, my walls were white. Now that part of the wall is pink. And what is that supposed to mean, John? Could mean that the intruder painted the wall pink in that particular spot to throw us off the case. And let me guess, the intruder also drank tea and considered eating a bowl of cereal, you know, wore the same clothes as you, and yeah, can't spell, and yeah, let me guess, all of those things right. Later in the interview in 1998, reviewing crime scene photos of the wine cellar, I think some of the pictures, I think around the 140s, I think 146, 147, I think 148 and 149, John Ramsey remarked that a cigar box in those photos looked different compared to another picture he had seen. He observed one box resting on its bottom and mentioned another box labeled Romeo and Juliet, that he did not recall owning. Stating he only remembered the Cuban cigars. He also noted that the cigar box in photograph 149 appeared to be upside down or dumped over on the floor. He expressed surprise at not noticing these details at the time of the discovery, as he was solely focused on JonBenet. Now, they have a history of doing this. Oh, that looks different. That looks, I don't know what that, I'm trying to look. Don't know what that looks like. But I'm observing this box resting over here, but it looks like it's been, it's upside down. It's messed up. And there are one or two things that I'm thinking about that. If this is a staged crime scene, somebody sacrificed their Cuban cigars, is what happened. Somebody sacrificed their Cuban cigars for the sake of this crime scene, is what happened. They sacrificed these cigars of they sacrificed these cigars for the purpose of trying to give us an illusion. Oh, look, this person came in, but if the cigars are turned upside down, then that means that this person was close to being caught. Either they were close to being caught at 6 o'clock in the morning, or at some point in time during the night, or this person was not close to being caught at all. Because when you have these cigars that are upside down or dumped over, or maybe JonBenet was hitting them on the way down or whatever, when she realized what kind of trouble she was in, maybe. And this is all, and that's what I'm saying. Like, there's no sort of end goal to tell us, okay, what might have happened here. That's not at all present in this case. We just know, hey, that this is out of order. Somebody may have knocked down my box of cigars in a clamor to get out of the wine cellar, huh, John? All right. To me, we get deeper into sort of this bull crap. John is now trying to convince us that there was a cigar box in the basement that doesn't belong to him, specifically a box of Romeo and Juliet's that he says he doesn't recognize. So let me get this straight. Not only did the intruder somehow get into the house without being seen, not only did they manage to stage a crime scene with ransom notes, pineapple, duct tape, and a stun gun, and maybe even a bat that doesn't belong to you, but they also had time and the forethought to bring an entire box of cigars with them. A full-blown box. Please help me understand. For what? See, this is the part where I get angry. Because for what? The heck? Why would he bring, bro? Why would the criminal bring a full-blown box of cigars to the crime scene, John? Patsy's telling us this man brought a tea bag. Did he bring a duffel bag? I guess he knew he was going to be camped out there all day, and he was like, you know what? I want some tea, and I want to wear the same thing that you guys are wearing. But, hey, being a criminal is hard. So I want to kick back with a nice little cigar, man. I'm going to be stressed out. I need to let some steam off. A full-blown box? You're trying to insinuate to me that a full-blown box of cigars was brought to the crime scene, and not only that, but all of your cigars were gone in exchange? What is this? This guy has gone above and beyond. This guy has gone above and beyond to mess with John's head, to taunt him by mixing his cigars in with John's cigars. This isn't just implausible. It's ridiculous. This sounds like a poorly written psychological thriller where the villain leaves little personal the villain is running around leaving little personal mind games behind, little mind clues, psychological clues behind. Are we really supposed to believe that the intruder planted a whole box of cigars and rearranged John's whole stash and managed to leave no trace of themselves? All right. What makes it worse is how inconsistent John is with his own memory. First, he tells us, I didn't notice anything out of place in the basement. He was too focused on JonBenet. That's what he says. But then later, during this photo review, suddenly he remembers everything. Oh, this cigar box looks different. That one was upside down, something that had been dumped over. So which one is it? You noticed nothing or you noticed something? Because what I see is someone trying to build a scene in hindsight. That's what it looks like. I'm not saying that's what you're doing. I can't accuse you of that, but that's what it seems like. You can't selectively regain photographic memory just in time to disassociate yourself from the objects in the photos and the dramatics. He doesn't even recognize a cigar brand in his own basement. Who put them there? People just sneaking down in your basement to put down cigars that you don't recognize. You go down on a weekly basis and all that time, because you've gone down there on a weekly basis. And in all of those weeks, you never recognized a box of cigars down there that were Romeo and Juliet's. Could it be the case that Patsy bought you some of those cigars for Christmas and gave them to you? We're supposed to believe he had this deep, exclusive taste for Monte Cristo cigars and only removed 2 from the box. All right. It's more of that sort of over-explaining in places that don't help. Vague confusion in places that, facts really matter. And then kind of to top it off, we're supposed to believe that this intruder was in such a rush that they just knocked it over and bolted out. But not before calmly making a glass of tea, feeding JonBenet pineapple, writing this 30-minute note. And to mind you, forgetting or messing up prior to say, you know what? I don't want to talk to, I don't, you know what? Forget Patsy. I don't want to talk to Patsy. She's too sweet. I'm just going to talk to John. And then carrying out a series of staging moves that required time and precision. This entire thing is so internally contradictory. It is almost laughable. It is laughable. You don't get to have a rushed intruder and at the same time a methodical intruder in the same breath. You don't get to say they were panicked, but then say they planted clothing fibers to frame us at the same time. And the tea bag, that's the cherry on top. Patsy said she doesn't put tea bags in glasses. She steeps them in a pot. So who did it? Why was it there? There's too much. You just throw that out there. I mean, you explain it. Because you're trying to get me to believe that a criminal bought some tea to the crime scene. There's too much being invented to explain away these objects. None of it adds up. The only logical explanation, I think, is that the crime scene wasn't manipulated by a criminal mastermind. It seems like someone was trying too hard to make it look like that. Further in 1998, John Ramsey reiterated that the wine cellar was a place where they stored items like wine cases and cigars, as well as Christmas decorations, which were accessed. The Christmas decorations were accessed only once a year, and indicated that there was no reason to go in there. Normally, sort of describing, he called it a dead-end room with limited lighting. I'm lost here. Because now John is trying to downplay his connection to the basement, calling it a dead-end room with limited lighting, and saying that there's really no reason to go down there. But as we just discussed, that's not true. In fact, it's quite the opposite. You're admitting to storing cigars in there, and not just any cigars, but those Monte Cristo Cubans that you smuggled back in the country. You went out of your way to smuggle back from Europe. Those mean something to you. If you get a box of shoes, guess what? And those box of shoes are placed in the closet, you're going to go out of your way, and you love that new box of shoes and the new shoes smell. You're going to go out of your way to get back to those shoes. I just want to go down there. Similarly, like if you got a pair of fresh Nikes or Jordans or something like that, you're going to go out of your way to pick those things up and just, man, I got to see it again. Oh, man, I just bought this new purse. Oh, my goodness, it's beautiful. Oh, I just got this new painting. Oh, I just got this new sofa that we're setting down in the basement. Oh, I just love it. We're just going down there and I'm just laying on this sofa. Oh, I just lay. It's so soft and so comfortable. We might even need to move it up to the top. Oh, but we can't move it up in the main room because whatever reason. But you still love it. And it becomes your guilty pleasure for a while. I think this is where John was with his cigars. They were his guilty pleasure. So every chance he gets, he goes down there and looks at those, just to look at them, just to admire them, just to look back and say, look here, John. Look how far you made it. Look how far you've come. And you're smoking once or twice a week. So if the only place you keep these cigars is in the wine cellar and you smoke at least once a week, then you're in that room at least once a week. And that's not a no reason at all to go in their room. That's a room that you're going to visit on a regular basis for a specific reason. And when you visit that space often, you know what belongs there and what doesn't. You don't suddenly fail to notice that a cigar box is overturned and that one thing is missing or is unfamiliar. If something is out of place, it stands out because your brain subconsciously tracks things that you regularly access. And let's not pretend cigars were the only thing down there. The basement held more than just that. You got Christmas decorations stored down there. You got your golf clubs also down there. John even admitted that he lost his key a few times and had to enter through the basement window. So clearly, this basement is used as an access point on a regular basis. And that's not just once a year like Christmas time. That's multiple times a year for various different reasons. There are different reasons why you guys are going down to the basement. You go in to get your clubs. You go in to grab your cigars, maybe to stash some gifts or maybe to hide something or whatever. You got locked out. But the idea that this basement was some sort of dusty storage closet that no one touched is false. This is the core of the house's utility. And if you're down there consistently, that makes you familiar with that environment. And you know what's moved. You know what's been touched. You know what's shifted. And you know if something isn't right. And so the more John tries to act like the basement was rarely used, the more obvious it becomes when he's trying to distance himself from a space that you're there every week. And what this all points to me is that it's not just a physical presence, but intimate circulation. The Ramseys, you have material fibers, prints, DNA all over the crime scene. From the bowl of pineapple to the duct tape on JonBenet's mouth. From the notepad used to write the ransom note to the pen sitting just feet away where Patsy made the 911 call. From Burke's bat being tampered with to the glass of tea that Patsy said didn't make sense in her house. We see this sort of rhythm, this pattern, this flow of people and materials throughout the home, especially around these key locations, the butler's kitchen, the spiral staircase, the basement, and JonBenet's room. And now John wants us to believe that the basement was barely used. Doesn't sit right. Because when I look at all of this, I don't see a foreign intruder. I see a sort of circulation. I see behavioral intimacy with the space. I see people who knew this house inside and out. And they're now trying to pretend they didn't. I think Linda Arndt's police report in 1996, December 26th of 1996, it was noted that Fleet White, when speaking with Detective Idler, mentioned having checked the wine cellar earlier that morning. However, he reported being unable to locate a light switch, and so he didn't enter, stating it was too dark to see anything inside. Now, let me just we were reading an article entitled um, "Missing Innocence" by Vanity Fair, and Anne Louise Bardock stated, um, she said something to the effect of, "Oh, the police, the police, they were almost close. They were almost there. They almost discovered JonBenet's body." No, they didn't, because I don't think JonBenet's body was in that wine cellar before. Because even though the police didn't catch it, there is somebody else who did, and that was Fleet White. Someone who was a friend, maybe somebody who's been to that house more than a handful of times, and your kids have been to that house, right? And also, too, not to mention, they probably, if we're to believe that, these Kobe kids, especially down on Christmas, these Kobe kids were downstairs playing in the basement, and they were really all over the house. Is really what it is. They were downstairs playing in the basement for a little while, and every now and again they would, just kind of play around and stuff like that in the Ramsey house. Then I'm pretty sure Fleet White has a good idea about how this basement works. He has a good idea. And we have Fleet White who says, okay, I know, and because Fleet is looking for something specific. If the child is missing, because Burke was like, oh, I didn't know if my sister was missing or this, that, or if she was hiding somewhere. You don't have to worry about that, because Fleet White came in and said, yeah, I'm familiar with that scenario. Let me go look and see if we can find these key places in which JonBenet might have disappeared to or be hiding in, because I have a daughter who did the same thing. And so he went right down to the basement to double check and say whatever. And so even though the cops didn't look, Fleet White did. And Fleet White didn't see anything. The only person, we have to wrestle with the only person who saw something in that wine cellar that day, was John Ramsey. The only person. What are the odds? You're the only person that can see, huh? The only person to crack this case, to crack the code. Oh, wow. Let's check the wine cellar. Oh, there she is in the wine cellar. And I saw it. So I got down and tried. Fleet already went in there. So if nobody else covered it, Fleet did. This is the most unsettling for me, because it speaks volumes about control, familiarity, and access. Fleet is John's best friend. Went down to the basement, couldn't see a thing. It was pitch black. Couldn't find the light switch. Didn't enter the room. Just kind of opened the door, didn't see anything. And he flat out tells police, I didn't see anything. Then hours later, John, just a couple of steps ahead of Fleet, goes down. Same dark basement, and flicks the light on. Pops open the wine cellar door, and immediately finds JonBenet. Nope, I'm lying. He didn't flick the light on. Same dark basement. And pops open the door, and lo and behold, the thing everybody's been looking for and couldn't find, immediately finds JonBenet. And I think that was jarring to Fleet. You can feel it in the way that he tells the story. He's shocked at how fast it happened. Shocked that John knew where anything was. John was moving. When I tell you, John was moving extremely quickly. John was moving real fast. And that's, it doesn't seem like a big deal, but the speed in which John moved to get to JonBenet and everything else that's involved, we're going to talk about that a little bit later, is quite, what's the word I'm looking for? Fishy. It's fishy. John moved fast. opened the door, even though it had a peg lock. John knew where the peg was. He knew how to unlock that door, and he, boom, unlocked it fast. Opened that door, looked down, boom, there's JonBenet. Immediately, instantly located JonBenet. For Fleet White, we're talking about a room that was black. It was a black void. But for John, it was familiar territory. And that's the difference that matters. John went down there probably sometimes in the dark. So John looked in that basement, in that wine cellar, to where his eyes probably got adjusted rather quickly. And even if it was dark, boom, I know this basement, so I can move over here and I can hit that peg. When you are familiar with a space, you can move through. Say, for example, if you're driving down a road, when you're familiar with that road, you know when the lights are going to turn green and yellow. You know where the turns are. You know where the bumps in the road are. And you just drive off of instinct. You know where people are likely to be walking and what you're going to do to avoid them. Should it come to that. And I think this is where John was in relation to Fleet. The fact that he could run around that corner so fast, hit that peg out of the way, open that, get in, because the peg is above the door. Now, I'm not saying John is a short person, but you're going to have to do a little bit to knock that peg out of the way, right? You're going to have to make sure that peg is completely moved and then open the door. And that means if Fleet was right behind John, that John opened that door with purpose. It's almost as if somebody says, wait, I got an idea. And they go and they run the idea. And they say, oh, just as I thought. That's what it seemed like John was doing when he opened that door. Fleet's account makes it clear that his view was physically blocked by John's body, by the narrowness of the door and how quickly it all went down. He wasn't afforded the ability to say, we found JonBenet. He couldn't say that. John found her, alone, first, by himself. And that creates a very strange dynamic. It's almost as if I hadn't known any better from what you said, it's almost like this is a scripted discovery. Because if the room was as dark as Fleet described it, and it had no windows, no natural light, then how is John immediately spotting a child lying beneath a blanket in a corner of a wine cellar without any hesitation? Especially when the door wasn't open all the way and Fleet didn't get a chance to peek in. Unless it becomes the case that maybe someone had prior knowledge of what he was going to see. This discovery was too fast and too precise. That's not how people find something shocking. It seems to be the case that that's how people confirm maybe something they already knew. I'm just speculating. Not any hard evidence or hard facts, but it does start to feel like less of a discovery and more like a controlled moment of presentation. John's speed in removing the peg, knowing the layout, knowing the light placement, moving ahead of Fleet, sort of all tells me it feels like this wasn't aimless. Feels like it was a little bit more targeted. There was some level of familiarity there that was used in an advantage state. And that changes everything because it raises the possibility that John may not have been surprised. He may have been prepared. Once again, this is speculation. I'm not accusing John of anything. Maybe not emotionally prepared, but maybe logistically. Because if somebody knew what was behind that door, you have this sort of contrast between his confidence and Fleet's disorientation, which is chilling. Because if one man can barely see into the room and another one walks straight up into it and points out a covered child on the floor within seconds, that's not a shared experience. You got one person leading a narrative and the other one being kept behind. Just same as he did a couple seconds earlier when he walked down to that window and Fleet said, "Hey, John, take a look at this broken window." And John said, "Yeah, that was broken last summer." John already knew the window was broken. John didn't say, "Oh, well, maybe the intruder broke it even more. Maybe Patsy fixed it." John tells us that he didn't know whether or not Patsy fixed it. He wasn't certain. But here he's telling us that he broke, standing right here in front of the window, that he broke it. How do you know, John? How do you know that Patsy didn't do what you asked her and get this fixed? And then some criminal came in and broke it because he knew you so well. John takes ownership and says, "I broke that and it never got fixed." Oh, so you know it never got fixed. That's a little bit more of a frequency. You being with that wine cellar and in that basement, that's a little bit more familiarity and frequency than you're willing to admit. You smoke once or twice a week, and you combine this with the admission that you store those cigars exclusively in the basement, sort of shatters the notion that you rarely access this. No, you're trying to downplay it. You frequently use this room. And so that frequent use of this room would naturally lead to a heightened awareness of its layout and any irregularities. Yet we have John here insisting that he noticed nothing unusual on the morning of December 26th, which is what he was supposed to be looking for. That's what Linda Arndt said. "If you find anything, let me know." And that is what keeps people looking at you. You have a man who habitually enters this space and stores prized possessions down here. And so you have within this, you should not find this room suddenly foreign or disorienting when tragedy strikes. And so the problem here is not merely what John remembers, but how he remembers it. He's able to say, "Okay, yeah, I remember my cigars. I remember sneaking them through customs, and I identified them in the photographs. But when we ask you about the fiber evidence and the garment identification and specific actions on the night of the murder, conveniently, you don't know." This is quite telling. It suggests you have a controlled narrative here, possibly, in which certain personal habits are emphasized to create an image of normalcy. That's what it seems like. Not saying it's true, but that's what it seems like to me. While these inconvenient facts are downplayed or obscured. John's reference to an unfamiliar cigar box in a crime scene photo only adds to the confusion, because you're implying either that there's tampering or implausibly suggesting that an intruder bought their own cigars along with their own intruder kit, in contrast to Fleet White's account where the wine cellar appeared as an impenetrable void. John's seamless navigation into the room, quick discovery of JonBenet, and confident familiarity with the basement sort of undermines this portrayal of detachment. When one person fumbles in the dark and another one glides to the truth, that's kind of psychological. And it's hard for me to believe that John Ramsey just stumbled upon the scene, because from what I can tell, it seems as if he led the way. So this cigar story, framed as sort of like this background color, now kind of reads like it reads like camouflage a little bit, carefully placed here to explain, "Oh, this is why I was down there. Not a big deal." But you're carefully explaining your presence in that room. And this room is central to the tragedy. So if anybody says, "Why were you down there?" "Oh, my cigars." And in that end, Because we could say, oh, the black fibers. Oh, my cigars. The black fibers from your shirt are down there. Oh, because I was wearing this all day and I had to go get the cigars. It's not the cigars that are indicting you. I don't care about those. It's your pattern of going down in that basement and acting like you don't know about what's going on in that basement when you do. Yeah. That's it for today. Let me know what you think. Like, share, and subscribe. And, hope you're well. Till the next time. Take it easy.